Gonna get started. Good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to Public Health's virtual education series, Wažookį, Family Conversations. I am Renelle, public health nurse, joined today by Jamie, Community Health Representative Supervisor, who will help moderate today's session. The goal of the series is to gather, learn, and share about Ho-Chunk culture, resources, services, and the connection to health. In public health, we focus on prevention, promotion, and protection of the health and well-being of our communities. Health and well-being are rooted in many aspects of our lives, from our physical body, our mental health, our spirit, the environment we live in, and much more. During these sessions, we will explore topics that can impact our health and well-being. Together, we will learn about tools and resources to improve our health and the health of our communities. Today, we are observing the National Day of Racial Healing, which falls on Tuesday following Martin Luther King Jr. Day each year. The National Day of Racial Healing was started by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation in 2017 as part of their Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation efforts. According to W.K. Kellogg Foundation, racial healing is a process that restores individuals and communities to wholeness, repairs the damage caused by racism, and transforms societal structures into one that affirm the inherent value of all people. We are happy to welcome Samantha Skenandore, partner at Patterson, Reelbird & Willson, LLP, a majority Native-owned law firm, to join us to talk about land acknowledgement and the legal return of Ho-Chunk ancestral homelands. Everyone, please welcome Samantha Skenandore.
Hi, hello. Thank you, Renelle. Thank you, Jamie. Thanks to you and your program for hosting and asking for me to participate in this effort to heal our tribal communities. As Renelle said, I'm a partner at a law firm. I've been practicing private law for 20 years this year. And it's my privilege to be one of the equity partners at a Native-owned law firm based out of Louisville, Colorado. I manage and run the Midwest office here in Madison, Wisconsin, here in Wažookį. I am a Ho-Chunk tribal member, and I am also a descendant of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. Grew up on that reservation with my dad's people, and have lived most of my life down here in Wažookį. And I'm happy to present to you a topic that is certainly part of my profession, but certainly, as Renelle said, part of my spirit and part of my healing and my wellness, which is working with the nations and living in the nation's ancestral homelands. So I'm going to share my screen and present to you a topic about Ho-Chunk land and its power to heal. And just give me a second here. Are you able to see that?
Yep, we see it.
Okay, perfect. Great. I can't see anything other than the screen. So if you just want to unmute and let me know if anything is needed on your end that you're seeing. So yes, here is the slide presentation, and just to comment, the idea of healing is dear to me. It's certainly always a piece in the back of my mind when I do work for tribes. I've had the pleasure of working for over 30 tribes, tribal companies, tribal organizations, nonprofits, tribal individuals in my 20-year career in private practice. And a lot of the work, it almost always begins and ends with, who is this tribe? What is their history? What's their culture? What is their ancestral land holdings? What does that mean to them? And how do we aggressively or strategically recover their land base and recover their connection with that land base? And it really goes to what the Kellogg Foundation and this program is seeking is having just a conversation about our ancestral lands and how that's such a critical component to our healing journey as Indigenous peoples. As I said, I work at this law firm. I just want to, be very, very open and transparent that while I do work and I'm an owner at this law firm, the opinions that are expressed in this presentation as requested of me by this program are certainly not reflective to those of the law firm. So I just want to make sure that we disclaim that this is not the views of Patterson, Earnhardt, Reelbird, and Willson. This is certainly my personal and my Ho-Chunk experience as being a young Ho-Chunk woman, but also being a lawyer for various tribes, and kind of taking a more holistic and real landscape look at connections with our ancestral lands and what that means for Indigenous peoples on their healing journeys. So before I dive into the connection with land, I think one of the things that we always should do when we approach a subject that involves our wellness is we kind of talk about what piece of that wellness are we going to focus on today. And in that context, we are talking about healing. We have a public health program at Ho-Chunk that works to that end, every day, all day long, with various tribal members from various ages and socioeconomic backgrounds. All communities need healing, and the question is, what is healing? And the question also is, what do you think healing is, and where do you think you are in that process, and why do you need healing? And certainly, just to acknowledge, us as human beings, we've all had a human experience that has involved a certain set of experiences that has caused us harm, and has harmed us, and has harmed others in different degrees. And there are lasting effects for people that do not engage in a healing journey to some extent or some level. And it's important that, we as individuals, we know, or we're learning that you can't heal everybody you want to, when you want to, in a way that you want to. We know that healing is, a subjective individual choice and a journey, and that, the choice has to start with recognizing what healing, you need. This is just my own personal perspective. And secondly, and probably part of that is, do you choose to heal or do you not choose to heal? And certainly choosing to heal kind of opens your mind up to how to heal, and how much effort you have to put into healing. And so, moving from there, some of the next moves would involve, what do you need to be able to heal? What are the necessary steps? Do you need professional help? Do you need self-discipline? Those really are the kind of the tree decision-making areas you get to, is like, do I need help, or can I do this myself? And sometimes we try to do it ourselves first, and then if we fail, then we go for professional help. But also, really, when you get down those pathways one way or the other, and this is the hardest part of healing, is really looking to what it is you need to heal from, and facing whatever that is, how much pain that brings, and how much re-traumatization, if we even say that. What does that mean, that you have to be ready and strong enough to hit that issue head on all over again, to be able to, unpeel it, take it from different levels. Maybe you feel to some extent that you have the capacity to do that. But this really goes to, this process of healing, and it's, healing's defined in so many different ways, and probably not even in the way I just described, but, again, my own experiences bring me to the next big bulleted point, which is, how do we as Ho-Chunks heal on a community level? We have a broad land base for our people. We have even different, dialects or versions of our language throughout that land base. We have different approaches to our religious and our day-to-day lives all over our community. We're very diverse as a people. And, we also experience, again, levels of trauma and levels of loss in our communities. And how do we heal from those? How do we continue to normalize a healthy healing process within our communities? And I wish I had the answer to that. I don't. But I do know that we do have to continue to work at them. And I acknowledge, our elders who put on like wellness camps over at our Andrew Blackhawk powwow grounds to pause our societal movements for a few short days, and talk about healing and have these conversations. And I understand those are going very, very well. And so we are moving in that direction as a community. But then I ask, and this is even some feedback from folks that have heard this presentation, is what role does our ancestral land, our Ho-Chunk ancestral land specifically, play in that healing process? And I heard from one tribal member that had explained to me that, they did not even originally think that our connection to the land was a part of healing. And that when they unpeeled the onion and said, okay, healing means we have to reconcile. We have to reconcile with a lot of things. We have to reconcile with a spouse, a parent, a grandparent, a Dega, a Chewy, a sibling, even our own children. And we have to reconcile an event or a series of events. And part of those things is like, as Renelle mentioned in the intro, is our environment. Where do we do that? Do we have a safe place to do that? And if we don't have a safe place to heal or unpeel that onion, then does it ever get done? And what gives us our strength in those spaces to do that? And I will adamantly say it's our ancestral land, and it's all around us. And whether or not we get out to it and we feel disconnected, and we need to reconnect. And that's really what this presentation is all about: is our spaces, our environment, the gift of this land space that our ancestors had taken such good care of for us, to heal no matter what's coming our way, and think about this in that context. And so, this really gets to the question of kind of turning the light on that process of healing, of shining the light on why is there a disconnect with our lands? Has it caused hurt? Does it give us a need for healing? And how do we heal with that in terms of land? How do we reconnect with our land? What are all the ways out there? And what could we be doing to face that reality as a maybe, it is probably more sensitive to maybe our elder populations that disconnect with land, because it was very real. It was happening on their watch and in front of them. And so it means a little something different to an elder, as opposed to, maybe my 16-year-old who didn't see us lose land, who sees me trying to buy land and get land back and celebrate those minimal successes for a half an acre here or 10 acres there or 40 acres there. I celebrate those things, but it wasn't only a generation or two where our ancestors were watching those go away permanently. And so there is this healing need, that in reality that this is a component of our healing process, and to reconnect and have that safe space in our own ancestral land to heal is very critical to our people, in my opinion. So when I mention our vast ancestral land, I'm not sure if everybody from the tribe has had a chance to take a look at our original, what I would consider our original map.
Samantha,
yes.
We're still on your title slide.
Oh, you are? Okay. I'm going to stop sharing and okay, we should be on the right slide though.
There you go. We have the
okay,
map.
Perfect. Great, thank you. Is it showing small, or is it not large enough? Let me pull it larger, because it is a map and I really want folks to see the details. There we go. Okay, so one of the greatest privileges I've had in my short life so far is after undergraduate, after I graduated from University of Wisconsin-Madison, I took on a job in Black River Falls in the Department of Heritage Preservation, and specifically the Cultural Resources Division, which is still alive and well today. And in the CRD area, our job was to essentially be tribal archivist. So yes, I got paid to study and gather archives for our own tribal library and our own records. And one of the things along the way that was being developed by our elders, and mind you, the entire division at the time I was there in the 90s was made up of elders that were all fluent in Ho-Chunk. And I was a very remedial speaker, even though I came from a fluent Ho-Chunk family. So I jumped in on trying to learn my language, our language. I even went to an 11-day, immersion camp over at Whirling Thunder in Toma. Continue to take lots of classes and practice as much as possible. Because one of the things at that time that was really, really important, and I miss it, is that a lot of the issues of traditions and customs of our Ho-Chunk people were being entertained every single Monday morning at 10 a.m. in front of the Ho-Chunk traditional court, which at that time was almost entirely spoken in Ho-Chunk. It was a paperless court. And because I worked in Cultural Resources Division, I had to know what they were talking about. And job-wise, and certainly on all other levels, it was important to learn language. One of the things that was under development at that time is this map. And this map kind of shows you that we've named locations, primarily just like a lot of explorers did back in the day when the earliest maps were drafted, whether it was the French or the British or other folks coming on in, really tracking and mapping lands based on watersheds and waterways. Like those were the roads at the time. There were not roads. You either, you took a canoe, and you would, carry that canoe across certain land bases and jump into other bodies of water. That was how you got around. That was our trade routes, right? And so back in the day, these names have stayed with the nation over time, and you can see, certainly if we named it, it's because we were there. A lot of these places that you see on this map is where we've had village sites. Where we conducted business, where we negotiated intertribal councils, where we talked about trade, we talked about everything from, domestic affairs, law enforcement. This was our space. This is our stronghold. This is our ancestral land. And this is where, if you're enrolled at Ho-Chunk, and we've had this, craziness of having to have pedigrees and blood quantum to prove that we belong, you probably have a direct connection to one or more of these spaces. And I think that's phenomenal when you think about it. And that's where things begin with us. And, if you hear the stories of our creation out of Wažookį at Red Banks over in Green Bay, and you hear about all the different stories there are with all of these village sites, all the way down from Rockford. And, you know that our land base, runs from Green Bay, all the way around Minneapolis, St. Paul, down to Dubuque, Iowa, way in southern Illinois. You see the St. Louis down there at the bottom of the map, Wažookį, the Missouri. So we traveled those rivers up and down and that was a normal occurrence. And if you look at, there's books by David Smith, who is a Winnebago, enrolled Winnebago, who is now, has moved on, has passed on. He had written books about our international trade routes as Ho-Chunk people, all the way down to South America. So our land holdings and our ability to name and dwell and occupy these lands for tens of thousands of years is a very critical place to start and think about. We were not confined to, District 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? We didn't have three little reps, representing us here in Madison. We had a few tribal leaders that, with moccasins on foot, and later on horseback, going out all over this country in all directions and preserving this land base for us. And that's phenomenal when you think about it. If you read books on the Indian Wars and you see how strategic our people were, we're crazy smart. I have to say this because I've studied all kinds of tribes and cultures, indigenous peoples worldwide. I've studied in Europe, and that our people were amazing diplomats and politicians. And we still are. I think we still are. We were able to keep the stronghold alive when all else was failing around us. And that is important. It's very important because we are how we are because of that very, very innate and amazing skill set that our ancestors had with our land. They did everything they could do to, play the game. They switched allegiances with the French and the British. They aligned and they fought and warred with enemies from other tribes, especially those tribes that supported the French invasion of Wisconsin and beyond, or the British invasion of Wisconsin and beyond. Our tribe fought ruthlessly to keep this land base. And I think the interesting thing, and I'm in no way, a clan leader or qualified to, be telling these stories, the detailed stories that I am, very lightly touching on today. But we do know that one of our traditions at Ho-Chunk, as I've been taught, is that you're Ho-Chunk wherever you are. And that's an important principle and tradition and custom of our people, is that if I go live at the North Pole or Switzerland or Greenland or the Panama Canal, it doesn't matter where I live. I'm Ho-Chunk wherever I am. And if you look at our census, our own tribal census and enrollment, you see that our people follow that. We do live all over the world. We've got tribal members everywhere, and all kinds of continents and different countries that you wouldn't even believe. And I think that's phenomenal. And that has been very important to me as a lawyer who walks into different tribal territories all over the country. And I walk in, at the core Ho-Chunk always. But certainly I come in as what I typically call a vanilla attorney, a neutral attorney who's I'm not even a woman. I'm not even from the Deer Clan. I'm just a plain vanilla attorney going in to learn about that tribe's history and culture. And I have to learn all of those things or I won't take a case on in that jurisdiction. And I've been barred in 10 tribal jurisdictions and in 2 different states. And that means I've applied that policy all 20 years. And knowing that and learning all of those spaces and those and the culture and traditions and the customary traditions of those peoples, I've learned to respect our fundamental law that we are Ho-Chunk wherever we go. And why does that mean something? It says something in terms of the land, is why don't we have a reservation? And I know we as Ho-Chunks have kicked it around and laughed about it because, we've had the last couple of years, working with local government, like state government, and you can see, you can buy these T-shirts that say Ho-Chunk Reservation. They got put up for a hot minute or two in Black River Falls, and they were taken down. And I found a lot of humor and irony in it as well because of our land history. And part of that tradition and custom that we're Ho-Chunk wherever we are, that got applied when the federal government came to all tribes and said, we're going to put you on reservations. We're going to reserve land for you for the benefit of you. We'll take a moral and legal duty to take care of you as federally recognized tribes. We have a federal trust relationship with you. And they said those things to Ho-Chunk as well. And our ancestors balked at that idea that we would take all of our tribal members living in all these spaces that you see in this map and put us on some tiny, acreage and make us completely dependent on the federal government. And I think that's important to acknowledge, that there is a piece of our leadership and our ancestral traditions and customs that made us not go down that pathway, made us not have a big rectangular reservation somewhere in Wisconsin that we all live on, and that is unlivable for our tribal communities. And our ancestors knew that, and they refused. And so what that meant is it meant removals. And Ronell, can you let me know if you can see this map?
We are currently on the white territory map.
Okay, so I'll just have to renew this every time, which is fine. I'll just keep talking while I'm sharing. So what that meant in terms of our realities as Ho-Chunk people in our history is really...
Samantha, Jamie's going to pull it up for you.
Oh, great. Do you want me to stop sharing? Great. Oh, that's perfect. Thank you, Jamie. Much better. Perfect. Okay, so moving on to our removals, because our ancestors said this is a no-go, where a lot of the other tribes, hundreds of other tribes, were negotiating where the reservations were going to be and what sort of requirements the United States would have to agree to for them to essentially not occupy their homelands anymore. And so what happened is that the federal government wanted us to be completely out of that pink area. When the cards fell and the United States said, we're coming for you, Ho-Chunks, we're coming for your land, the pink area is what they determined and defined as our land. Now, it's not too different from the slide before that, right? It's a smaller core area of what our ancestral homelands, according to our oral history, looks like. It was a smaller footprint. Right. At the end of the day, the pink ceded territories accounted for some 10.5 million acres. And if you didn't know that our tribe had title, literally 10.5 million acres in this area. Can you imagine if we still had this land base today? I mean, just think about those things. And that's, again, not even all of it. That's a small core portion of the overall land base. It's a fraction, right? And so United States wanted this land base. They wanted it for the minerals, you know, the ore, iron, everything that's in the ground. They wanted it for the farmland. They want it for the waterways, right? This is a critical land base. Look at those Great Lakes. There's no place in the world, there's very few places in the world that have access to this much clean water. They wanted us out, so they removed us. And there are discussions, did they remove us 8 times? Did they remove us 9 times? Arguably, it's 9 times. And you can see some of these arrows. But I point out to you these arrows of removing us, right? Removing us, you see the dark purple, not dotted arrows. That's them taking us off of our lands. Those are those efforts. And if you hear the stories, how did they remove us? You know, we talk about the Cherokee Trail of Tears a lot. That's got a lot of, you know, historical, visuality, but they don't talk about what they did to Ho-Chunks. And we don't even talk about how they took us off our lands. We don't talk about how they strapped young children in buckboard wagons for days and weeks at a time and remove them. But they did. They did a lot of awful things. And what I think is important to understand and reconcile with is the dotted lines. Those dotted lines show the people going back to their homelands, right? Direction of return. And that's important. Once they removed us, each and every single time, our people abandoned that location and went back home. And I think that's critical. I don't know of any other tribe in the United States that has this history. And I think that's phenomenal. And once you talk to other tribes like the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, you talk to Osage, Ponkas, people that are related to us in some way, historical way that even, you know, it's not even captured in a lot of history books. These nations are related to us and they have old stories about us as well. And they call us the old ones. They call us the ancient ones. They call our language the oldest, the most original. So there's a lot to be proud of. And there's, again, that foundational customary law of being Ho-Chunk wherever you are. And we can't be contained because we have to be Ho-Chunk everywhere. And that was a sound rule and why we don't have a reservation. And so the irony of it, like I said, when the DOT worked with the tribes and the tribes had asked for signs to be erected all around the reservation saying you're on the Oneida Reservation and to do it in their dual language, do it in English and do it in their language. The DOT said, yeah, absolutely, we'll do that. And they went to Ho-Chunk and they showed up with the green sign that said Ho-Chunk Reservation and they put it there in the Mission, which is one of the most highly populated Ho-Chunk communities. And like it did for other tribes, it brought a sense of pride and a sense of ownership and a sense of reconnection with their homelands. But for Ho-Chunks, it didn't bring that, right? It was a joke. It was funny. It was all over social media that we don't have a reservation. We never would agree to a reservation. Why are we putting reservation signs up here? That's funny. And a couple of days later or so, that those signs came down in the Mission. And that's why. That is why. And if you didn't know that, that's important to know that that sign meant something else to other nations that were putting those signs up around their reservations. But Ho-Chunks refused reservations for hundreds of years. And it's important to know that that is why that was funny, but it very seriously speaking, it really goes to our connection with the land and our connection with ourselves as a people. And it's very strong today. Let's go to the next slide. So we then shift gears into a little bit about our history and our customs and where we come from and wrapping our heads around all of that. If you didn't hear it from that context, that's the way I see things as an attorney, a Ho-Chunk woman, somebody who deeply respects our customary ways. And certainly in my day-to-day life as a professional attorney working for corporate America, I practice that as much to the extent that I can. And it's not always easy, but I certainly do my best. And because of that, I have to say, because of the way that I was raised and I was taught those values and those morals, I've been able to do phenomenal things in my career, not just for Ho-Chunk, for all of my other clients. I've never not been able to succeed when it comes to land for my other clients as well, because of this value system that is deeply rooted inside of me. And one of the things that I felt a little put off on is the land back movement. And you would think me in this position would be, flags and ribbon skirts and waving banners left and right for land back. But I think of more of the practicality as a transactional lawyer. how do you really transfer that deed back to that tribe? What that is really the real land back. That's really the goal here. And I think of, bringing awareness is certainly helpful in a lot of ways. Demanding it, I don't think necessarily gets you the results you want. Saying, okay, we're on stolen land, give us our land back. And that's really the message of the land back movement, right? But there's a lot more to it than that. There are a lot of nonprofits and individuals, corporations with corporate policies, lawyers, lobbyists. We're all working on land back. We're working on it strategically. We're working on it more practical levels and real levels. And there are some very amazing, well-learned methods and strategies just under basic American property law. And at the end of the day, being a property attorney, how do you think these corporations acquire all these lands? How do you think they get passes on skirting, environmental laws and other practices? How do they not pay more than fair market value for properties? Well, these are strategies that tribes need to know, and it needs to be common knowledge and practice. And it actually, in my opinion, could be taken on from a community standpoint. All of our Ho-Chunks throughout that massive land base we just looked at could all be working towards land back from all these different avenues of ways title actually moves. So the land back movement is well in play. Does it result in land coming back? Yeah, I would say some. Could we be more strategic about it for Ho-Chunks specifically? Absolutely. Absolutely. And, again, we're not a reservation base. We don't have one reservation. We have scattered village sites represented by district representatives. And essentially, we have created with our 1994 Constitution a new version of the stronghold. And so, the stronghold meant we're going to stay in our areas, and we should be reacquiring those lands in all of those areas. That's what I think the Ho-Chunk Nation's goal was when they adopted the 1994 Constitution. And I think the people need to work towards that end. Next slide. So let's dive into what land back is and could be. In my opinion, now is the time to modify and adapt our worldviews and capacities to prepare for and work for, more than anything, and reconnect with our ancestral homelands and everything in it in every way possible. That's just my theory around land back. That is my theory towards healing. That is my theory that we have capacity to do. But it all starts with our worldviews. It starts with, and this is, par for the course. Every tribe has this. We have naysayers that keep our elected officials accountable, but sometimes there are naysayers and there are actions that get in the way of our ability to do all these things we want our government to be doing. And I say that specifically in terms of business affairs, and specifically in terms of actually getting our land back and restoring our homelands. When we make public, for example, our strategies, our partners about these things, that invites people to break down that process and leads us into a zero gain. And so these strategies, you don't see, DuPont or Molson Coors or Elon Musk company. You don't see Tesla telling you what their corporate strategies are, their investment strategies, and what land they're buying, and what manufacturing places they're putting up, and what kind of deals and tax-free zones they're working with, and how they're manipulating rules. They don't tell you those things. And that is the hard piece, I think, with becoming a very democratic Ho-Chunk government, is that those things become public, they leak, and they kill opportunities a lot. And so having a worldview of getting land back means we first have to be strategic, and we have to be private with our affairs. And I think that helps us. That's one of the biggest killers of why we don't have as much land as we should, is because of our worldview of publicly, putting our business out there and attacking individuals that are working towards these ends. And that's a real blunt, reality for me that I've watched closely in my short 40 years. But how does it work then? Let's talk about how it works. It works. There are ways to get land back, right? You can have, the tribe can go out and purchase land, which it sometimes does. Individuals, whether it doesn't matter what background they are, they don't even have to be Ho-Chunk. They can be corporations and nonprofits. They can gift transfer land back to the tribe. That's one other way that we reacquire our land base. And there's also some third parties that help you get that. So like, for example, there's like an archaeological society that helps tribes buy back their land. So they go out and raise money from private or public foundations, and they may take the title to a land with sacred sites on it, but it's for the benefit of the tribe. And there's no way that that land can be developed because it's in that sort of holding. And so you can strategically reacquire land back through third-party partners. That could be conservation nonprofits, archaeological nonprofits, or people that are somewhere in, resource sustainability programs, right? So there are other strategies that to employ to get title back. There are also ways, that we could lease. And this is something that I don't think the nation does a whole lot of, is we can be leasing maybe $1 lease for 99 years, right? We could reacquire some land back from a friendly landowner, and some tribes do that. Some tribes lease areas short and long term, preferably long term. We also could be asserting claims we have against other individuals or the state government or the federal government. If we have claims that are viable in court, we could assert those claims and aim for a land settlement. That is very common. We see a lot of tribes, if you Google land settlement for tribes, you'll see how a lot of tribes in the last few years have reached agreements with the United States of America, and they get some of their land back as a part of the settlement terms. Also, which is also largely missed by tribes, including perhaps ours, is to really get involved in corporate partners and understand what corporate policies they might have around working in and around our ancestral homelands. And and I have to say from experience, from working in big law for 15 years and meeting general counsels and boards of directors, if I get a chance, to have coffee with them, I always ask, hey, do you have a corporate policy involving the indigenous peoples where you're based in? And they'll say, well, we want to. We don't know how to do that. How do we do that, Samantha? And these corporate boards are getting younger and younger, and they are more and more open to finding some policy that they can hang their hat on or start a relationship with the local tribe. And I have literally seen title move from these companies back to tribes, 80 acres at a time here and there, sacred sites, water rights, you name it. That is a quick, easy way to get land back, is to have a relationship with a corporate partner, steer their company in a direction that's favorable to the tribe, and look towards a land transfer. There are also different things we can use as tools. If your lawyers that are barred in Wisconsin know that there's a plethora of areas in the Wisconsin statutes that allow for the state to extend its jurisdiction and authority onto local governments, meaning these little towns and villages that we all live and work around. Those towns and villages actually have been bestowed a lot of jurisdictional authority, and they can work with that authority in various and creative ways towards land back or leases or jurisdiction, right? Even jurisdiction. So how that should be explored on all those different communities, it matters. And this goes to my resolve of all people working towards this. How do they want to, if these local towns and villages in Wisconsin want to work towards that end with the nation, why would they want to do that? Well, first they have to have a relation. And remember, I go back to, what did it take to keep our homelands whole? It took politics and relationship building and trust. And we can't do that if, our district representatives aren't in these town hall meetings, establishing and maintaining relationships, or we as community members, which could potentially be a lot more powerful in those settings, could also do the same. Go up to your town meeting, start having a relationship with your board, pay attention to what they're doing with land, find ways to align the nation's mission with the local town's mission, and then exercise those laws that give them that authority to do that. There are other ways too as well. There are state and federal land exchange options. The law authorizes these exchanges. For example, if the nation wants a site that has sacred sites on it and it's owned by the state, maybe there's a trade opportunity here, or maybe there is another transactional deal. And I'll mention this, and you can Google this as Ho-Chunk members. You can Google the Kingsley Bend mound site right off of Highway 16 by Wisconsin Dells, Quick story on that. It was owned by the DOT not that long ago, Wisconsin Department of Transportation, and it was a wayside. It still is a wayside today, but it was not owned. It's no longer owned by the DOT. It's owned by the Ho-Chunk Nation. How did we get Wisconsin DOT wayside transferred to the Ho-Chunk Nation at zero cost? Well, we were strategic. We were smart. We kept it quiet. We partnered with the DOT's general counsel. We looked at the land and the value it had to the DOT and compared that to the value it had with Ho-Chunk. Ho-Chunk had already sent its heritage preservation staff out to clean up that mound site regularly, fix the water, keep it up, keep it clean. Our Ho-Chunk casino security would make rounds and check on the site as well at all different hours. We were putting efforts into land that we didn't own, but that mattered to us for a long time. And so when it came time to look at it and be strategic and pull a trigger, Ho-Chunk was able to get the land transferred under state statutes to the nation for $0, and taking into account all the time and money expense that the nation had already took on to be good stewards of that land, even though we didn't own it. And that all got credited in the agreement, and the land transferred to the Ho-Chunk Nation. And so that's a good example of a win-win situation for the state and for Ho-Chunk. Next slide. So we talked about what land back is. We talked about ways that it gets done, and then let's talk about the why. And I alluded to this earlier about land being medicine, land being space for healing. If you are not in a space that you feel safe, it's very, very difficult to heal. Is it impossible? Probably very hard to do, but to go out into our homelands and heal, it would be is a right and privilege our ancestors had that we don't have so much of an ability to do that, or don't we? So the good question for all of us with Ho-Chunks still living throughout that major land space and beyond is kind of putting our head around, what do we want to protect? What is the most critical low-hanging fruit? What do we need to protect? And why does it need protection? How are we going to protect it with all those strategies of land back? Who's going to protect it? Who's in charge? Who's the identified on record steward of that land? And then when and how soon can we actually protect it? And so some of the popular items from tribes are really geared towards nature. We care about everything in our ancestral spaces, everything, the fish, the streams itself, the creatures, the reptiles and the insects, everything there needs to be there for that ecosystem to work. And so tribes often take a holistic approach on what they want protected, and they want nature generally protected. And this is why tribes go after opportunities to regulate their airspace, their water. It's called treatment as a state. It's a federal law through the Environmental Protection Agency that allows tribes to take on the EPA's job of monitoring what is going on in our lands and waters, and what do we do in terms of regulating it to the standards that we're going to set for it. So this is a part of land back and land stewardship, but also people then look at specific ecosystems. Where, for example, the Ho-Chunk Nation recently joined in a legal battle against frack mining. They were looking at ecosystems that were in threat of harm from this practice. There can also be an aim for species specific. And a good example that I can throw out there now that's happening as we speak is the Mashpee Band of Wampanoag in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. The youth have been leading ecosystem protections nationwide from all tribes. If you go to conferences on natural resources and leadership, you're going to see the front row filled up with 13, 14, and 15-year-old Native kids from all different tribes, all talking to each other, figuring out how they're going to save the planet, right? They're working, they're there. I see them, I talk to them. But here, this group of very active Mashpee youth went to their tribal leaders, and they brought a resolution, a tribal resolution forward. It said, hey, we are well aware that 96% of our herring population, the herring is the small black fish that the Wampanoags, that was their long sustenance, right? It's gone, it's decimated. The local town of Mashpee went and broke down and took away all the natural stairs and ladders for the herring to come in from the ocean. and travel upwards to the fresh water sources and spawn and then come back down to the ocean. Those had been obliterated. And, our elders told us that their pathways, their migration patterns used to flow in the black like oil, and now there's just sparing small fish. We can't sustain ourselves. If this herring goes away, our tribe will go away. And so the youth did a rights of nature and a very aggressive resolution that would allow for the tribe to work towards protecting and calling this a state of emergency to protect the herring. And that passed unanimously by that tribal council. And they are now raising money, and they're planning to deconstruct the DNR ladders and their concrete ladders where the fish aren't surviving or making it their way to spawn. And they're going to put the natural ladders in back to the way the tribe used to maintain them. And look towards the population to replenish itself. So that's a species-specific land medicine solution that is going on as we speak. There are also efforts for certain lands that can be targeted. And this is, here's a good example. The federal government and the state government dispose of land all the time. And I'll say that again. The federal government and the state government dispose of land all the time. Now, why are tribes not going after that land? A variety of reasons. So if you go to the GSA, General Services Administration, or you look at the State Department of Administration here in Wisconsin, you will see that they have a land disposition process. And, to the extent that our tribe, which I know nothing about, whether we are staying vigilant on properties that would involve certain lands that become available, what are we doing with that opportunity? Do we have a set aside land acquisition account? And certainly, when you buy from a government, it's supposed to, they usually have a bidding process. So there is a fair market value piece of that. But are we ready and positioned to reacquire lands from a standard process that has been going on for decades? We also look to bodies of water, rivers, and watersheds. Like, think of the water around where you live. Does it smell? Is it drinkable? Have you went on the public database to see what each of the wells, what's the performance of each of the wells? Is there contaminants in the well that your water source to your house is, those are all public. For example, I'm here in Madison, Wisconsin, and when I came to buy a house, I didn't look at, the beauty of all the factors people look for. Where's the happening neighborhood? I looked at the wells. I grabbed all the well data online and found the cleanest, best performing well in the Madison area. And it was at that time, it was well 25 here in Madison. And it had the best performance in terms of turning around the cleanest water. And, when I put my kid in a bathtub, I want to make sure that water is maybe not perfect or not great, close to being great, but it's better than anywhere else in the area, right? And having lived in Phoenix and looking at the water that I was bathing my child in, I was appalled. I couldn't wait to sell that house. That was disgusting. So, we have to think about our bodies of water, our water municipal services. I'm glad Ho-Chunk typically invests into their water treatment facilities and does a pretty darn good job with making sure our water stays clean to our neighborhoods. But not all of us live in tribal neighborhoods, so you have to be careful then, right? So we look at those sorts of things, and we also look at food medicine. And I think this is something that I'm really enjoying seeing with our Department of Agriculture and just nationally and even regionally here in the Great Lakes area, where a lot of the tribes are coming together and they're reharvesting, old seeds. They're reinvigorating those seed populations. There's seed banking, there's seed sharing. And then where do you grow this, right? And how do you preserve that going forward? Also, what are we doing with our agricultural practices? We have a lot of agricultural lands at Ho-Chunk. How are we using that land to create food medicine for our people? And I think, one of the good examples I think is a huge success is our Indian corn, right? Like growing that corn, even, different seed species, depending on the location and what the DNR for our tribe is doing, but also being open and sharing. Hey, come pick corn. Hey, come dry corn. And people we all as tribal members have access to that. That's food medicine, and that's a success story for us that I'm very proud of our programs and our leadership for doing that. But ultimately, one thing I have the deepest concern for is our sacred sites. There has not been, in my opinion, a large effort to do a sacred site inventory and think about a strategic plan and reacquiring those. And also, when we don't own them, and we don't visit them and we don't take care of them, we become disconnected. And those sites were not meant to be disconnected from us. They were there, they were put there explicitly for us to continue to have a relationship with those spaces. They're purposefully put there and marked. I mean, big shining light on, you know, our mounds and our petroglyphs and things. They were meant for us to see and know about. Those were our ancestors' way of communicating with us generations later. And we don't own a lot of them. We don't have access. We don't lease them. We barely care about them. And, you know, I think that that is a space that we could really focus on going forward. There's lots of threats, and they're becoming bigger. The more we are not active in this regard, the larger the real threats are. Next slide. So one of the big movements besides land back, but very much interrelated and cannot be separated from the land back movement, is another movement that is called the Rights of Nature movement. And part of what I mentioned earlier about the MASHP focusing on their state of emergency around their hearing, part of that resolution included a provision that extended rights to the fish. It gave them rights just like human beings have rights, and it really comes down to what United States law, how did we get here in 2025? What does the law say, and what rights have been taken away? What rights are impossible to, or seeming impossible to reacquire or to reassert? Now, there are times, you know, we're right now in the midst of talking about birthright citizenship, and we're talking about the right to vote and women, the women's suffrage movement, right? There are times in the United States' history where these rights never existed, and they had to be fought for to exist in today's modern world. But along the way, equally so, rights have also been taken away. They continue to be eroded. Our Constitution is certainly under attack right now with the new administration. And it really should give us pause just to sit back and say, why have we as even Ho-Chunks in the modern day have succumbed to this United States culture through their laws? Now, think back to what I said about our Ho-Chunk traditions and customary laws about our property concept, that we cannot be confined to one reservation, that we are Ho-Chunk and our homelands are our spaces. And they are going to be where they are now. They're always going to be there for us, right? That was what we were taught. And we think of United States in contrast to that. This contrast is that everything out there in nature is property. And when I say it's property, I mean, it's got to be owned by something or someone. And it doesn't own itself. There's no sovereignty with a tree, right? A tree doesn't own itself, according to United States law. A tree is titled to and strung, it is stuck to a property by deed, and the person who owns that property owns that tree, right? Unless there's some law that says otherwise, right? So here, the United States treats nature as property. And when it treats it as property, it means that it's a consumable good. It's consumable. It means people then inherently under property law, and that's the basis for all law across the whole entire globe, the whole basis for all law, constitutional law, property law, everything is property law, and that things have a title and things have an owner, and that owner has rights to that property. Generally, it also, again, incessantly includes our consumerism. We now have, cell phones. We all have constant things sold to us every day. We can spend all of our money in a matter of minutes on our cell phones. All of us can. It's very easy to do. And so we look at property in terms of human consumerisms and how we're promoted to consume, and that we have rights to consume. And that's the most guarded right in the world. It is one of the most, if not the most guarded right in the United States. It's people's right to property, right? And so when that happens, when that is the reality and the culture of our law, then it really heightens the reality that nature possesses little to no rights for itself. It cannot go argue for itself in a court of law. It cannot file a motion to stop a project from harming itself or its ecosystem. It can't do these things. So who does that for them, right? And that's why there's a rights of nature movement across the world. And entire countries are now extending rights to nature and standing up the right of an individual attorney or advocate or expert to speak on behalf of those trees or that water ecosystem or that sacred site, those sorts of things. So that movement's afoot. It is gaining lots of momentum. It'll be here before we know it. In fact, it's already here in Wisconsin. The Menominee tribe and the County of Milwaukee already passed rights of nature laws. here in Wisconsin. So it's here. But ultimately, we know that environmental laws fall short of these minimal protections. Again, they will assess, and this is also up for debate. Just I think yesterday, this new presidential administration fired two of the top people at the Environmental Protection Agency, and these are the people that are guarded in assessing whether some sort of project will have adverse effects to an environment. So if the EPA's got to monitor a frack mining company permit that's going to happen in Wisconsin Rapids, and the EPA as an agency, which is supposed to watchdog and uphold all the federal laws around environmentalism, if they don't have leadership that is going to make sure that that's properly assessed, that project's going to go through. And that environment in Wisconsin Rapids will be contaminated. And to what extent and to what abilities can we clean up or get in front of that? It's to be seen. We're early on in this administration. So these are very important laws that affect all of our homelands at all times. And so in the system of the rights of nature, the idea then is that these incapacitated humans, just like we have children, people that have developmental challenges or become sick in ways that they can't advocate for themselves, the courts have an established system where an attorney or an advocate, competent advocate, can speak on behalf of that guardian, of that ward, and they act as their guardian in the courts. They're all over the place. We do it as parents every day. We see people do this for incapacitated elders. It's a very established process. So the idea is to mimic that same process and put these legal advocates in charge of nature when threats of harm come their way, right? So that's the idea of the rights of nature. And then in the end, when there is a judgment, let's say there's a judgment against a frack mining company, whatever contamination or damage that they did to that ecosystem, when nature suffers, that property owner, again, go back to that property concept, that human property owner or corporation whoever owns that land, they don't get paid anymore for their damages or loss to their land. Nature actually gets the paycheck. Nature gets the restitution. Nature gets to use that money to clean itself, restore itself back to as close as possible to its original condition before the harm happened. Nature gets to be made whole as opposed to a human being. But right now, when there's environmental spill on private land, that private property owner, if they're awarded some damages, they get that check, not nature. Next slide. So wrapping all of these things together, knowing all of these things about, the game of getting land back and reconnecting, like what does it take to do that? What are some of the strategies and ways that we do this? We think about, what can tribes do? What can our tribe do? And what can we learn from each other and not reinvent the wheel? That's always my biggest mojo when it comes to solving problems and thinking of solutions for any individual client is like, has it been done before? How was it done? Do we want to do it the same way? Will we have the result we want? But at the end of the day, the reality that we even have a tribe that is federally recognized is our number one asset. Our sovereignty brings us that capacity to get our land back to us and allow us to heal in bigger and better ways. And how do we get there? Part of that sovereignty, again, it's inherent. We have the ability to politic. We have the uncanny ability to politic and to make friends and to align our goals with others and get what we need, advance our tribal members and the nation as a whole. And as we know, our tribe is not just about the human beings in it. It's our homelands, right? That's the Wažookį Nation, is our homelands as well. So we cannot forget that it's not just about the tribal members and are we going to get a check every month? It's about the homelands and are we taking care of it? Is it going to take care of us? Because if it's not there, as we've learned, that's not a good thing. And the politics really come down to one really undefined, messy, sloppy task of finding and securing allies, going out and being present, going to these town hall meetings, going to the education board meetings, stepping up and running for these offices, finding and aligning with people, letting them see our Wažookį integrity and character and all of these great things, and then carrying those opportunities that we see along those day-to-day things. It's the tortoise and the hare. It's not who gets it quickly. It's, staying around and building relationships and giving that information to the tribe when it's, makes sense and that the tribe can align and jump on in and help out some cause or some issue, and likewise get some benefit out of it for the tribes, for the tribe itself. That's an opportunity. That's politics. In the end, we talk about land back in different ways. We, as mentioned, land acknowledgement is important, and a lot of land acknowledgement really isn't a tribal thing. It is a municipality thing. It's a non-tribal municipality effort to reconcile their own acknowledgement that they themselves are living, breathing, working, and protecting a community that isn't originally theirs. And so land acknowledgement is a healing process that isn't necessarily a tribal thing. It's a non-tribal thing. It is their healing process, right? So when we talk about healing, people, tribal members, there's a whole group of people nationwide that just really admonish the land acknowledgement process. And that's not good to do, in my opinion, not good to do in a variety of ways, because first of all, the land acknowledgement, again, it's a healing process for the municipality that's passing a resolution saying we acknowledge we live on ancestral Ho-Chunk lands. That's the statement. And that's a big step for municipalities, that they were quite the opposite just a couple decades ago, right? Just before the civil rights movement, they would never think of acknowledging anything like that. It would lead to all kinds of things that weren't in their possessory land, land grab eras. So these are good steps. And they should continue. They are, as far as a baby step that municipality can go, that's what they can do. And if they've done it, great. If, the state does it, great. Encourage it. We already know those are our ancestral lands. It's not necessarily, but and in some ways it's healing to us to see our neighbors acknowledge us, and that's good. But folks want to say, all right, it doesn't mean anything for you to acknowledge us. It only means something when you give us our land back. And that is just not going to happen. In fact, when you say those things, I'll tell you what the real response is, because I talk to these municipalities, is, wow, maybe we shouldn't have done this. Maybe at some point we might have to rescind this if we have a bad relationship with that tribe. So does that get you closer to that municipality returning any land to you? Absolutely not. You can't go and say you didn't do enough. We don't want your land acknowledgement. Do you think that municipality who has tens of thousands of acres is going to then gift a piece of land back to the tribe? It's just not going to happen. That's not how it works, So I don't welcome that response from Indian country, because it really makes it hard for us to actually, for me to transact a deed back to the tribe. It just probably isn't going to happen. So that's not helpful, in my opinion. Going in and learning about them, being curious about them. When I say them, I mean other local municipalities. What is their concerns? What are their values, and how are they trying to solve those problems? And are there collective ways that we integrate, the voice of our Ho-Chunks in those processes? I think that's the right way to do things, and that will yield better results in terms of land back. But there are other things out there. We already talked about rights of nature and jurisdictional authority, where I mentioned, there are state, federal, and tribal laws that extend jurisdiction rights to local municipalities for them to transfer jurisdiction to tribes. What jurisdiction would we want? Maybe we pass a rights of nature law and we ask certain counties to enforce it, or transfer jurisdiction to us so that we can enforce it on those lands. Why can't we do that, right? And again, the other option is going into settlements in the United States. And I'll give a good example here. One of my jobs as an attorney and a lobbyist is I work on settlements for Indian tribes. One of them involves, how do you get water back? Out west, we have water out of our ears, supposedly. Here in Wisconsin, we don't really have this problem, but trust me and mind when I tell you, it's coming our way. They are after our water like you wouldn't believe, more than ever. And so in the West, where they've created sophisticated laws and rules and mechanisms and processes for a tribe to gain legal rights to its water, that is still just now going on in the 2020s, right? There's a lot of tribes that don't have legal right to their water, and they're trying to exist without legal rights. One of my clients, that's the case for them. We are working on a settlement. The settlement right now is a $568 million settlement that involves building a reservoir to capture a river and make sure that they have water throughout the years. And then there's a sophisticated operations and management scheme where they release the water down to the other folks past the reservations. So they're non-tribal people. On top of it, when you settle for your land or your water rights, you really need to own the water, the land that produces the water. So like where we have springs, where the water comes out of the land, you need to own that so that there is a water source that you are settling on. And so in this case, when we talk about a settlement, water settlement now includes about 11,000 acres of land that the federal government would give back to this tribe, along with declaring how many acre feet of water it's entitled to on its own lands. So that's what that water settlement looks like. And it involves, like I said, 12,000 acres of land. And that's one way to get land back for tribes is through these settlements. The other thing that's very popular in the Biden-Harris administration was these cooperative stewardship agreements. And, you look at things like Bears Ears and other National Park Service agreements. I think there's one in New Mexico and down in Arizona where the tribes become, basically, they share ownership, share management decisions over a piece of land. And they do things, it includes things like jurisdictional authority. So maybe the tribal law officers come in and help steward and keep, the hours and the management rules intact so that land is preserved and taken care of. But that's one way to do that. And where does that lead? If you're doing a stewardship with a federal agency after some time, maybe that agency can, under proper legal authority, return the land back to you, right? If you've already been managing it for 10 or 20 years, you know how to manage it. And the United States says we can't afford to manage this national park, give it back to the tribe. That's one way you work towards those ends. For cooperative stewardship agreement, maybe a pathway to title, right? Next slide. So we're running in the last couple of minutes of this presentation, and I just want to give you some, to-do lists, some things to think about. What can I do? What can I do? I'm a Ho-Chunk person, and I put on my different hat all the time. And sometimes my hat is, I'm just a tribal member in Dajope, Wisconsin. I'm in Madison, and what do? And I've gone into city meetings where they are, refacing portions of the city. They're redeveloping, putting in roads or redeveloping something. And I'll go in, not as an attorney, not as a lobbyist, not representing anybody but myself as a community member, because sometimes, you have more power doing that. And I'll go in and I'll say, this is what I think this needs to look like. And, you need to talk to the nation. You need to incorporate what our ancestors originally left here in the space and give that back to us as social justice reasons. All of those things, I will do, just be active in my community to weigh in. And those are typically welcomed thoughts that are typically not in the comment section of projects for any city or village or town. So oftentimes those are welcomed. But how do you get there to be able to say those things? Well, we're all at different levels of just learning. I'm always continuously learning. I never profess to know everything. I try to take what I'm taught and apply it into an effort and make it meaningfully successful. But one thing, number one, is our language. And I mentioned that in the past. Like if we, the way that we talk about our land and spaces and each other is captured in this beautiful language, our beautiful Ho-Chunk language. And as I've ebbed and flowed into being a mediocre speaker to having to start all over again, I am constantly reminded in every minute of trying to learn a language of how beautiful it is. And that when I see two Ho-Chunks speaking to each other in it, how even immensely more beautiful that is. Or to hear one person speaking to a group of people and collectively wrapping them around that beautiful language that always, tells our history. It always reminds us of our clan structure. It always reminds us of the medicine around us and how we appreciate it and how we are gifting it today and how we will work towards our next generations to gift it in the future and how we talk about different things. And in the, the modern world of like the things in our ecosystems, they're called, legally sentient beings that they have meaning and purpose and they care about themselves. Does the grass recognize things? And there's all kinds of new academic publishings coming out from all kinds of natives across the globe, where they're diving into these things they've learned from their ancestors about language, history, clan medicines, and sentient beings. And they're applying those to modern sciences and they're publishing and they're coming out left and right. And there are even times, I think I was looking at one around horses and horse clan culture with the Plains Indians. And they were talking about how, how the grass remembers. The grass works better with the horses. It remembers the buffalo. and it does not like cattle. Like there's like literally academic papers like exploring these things. So what can I do? Learn, always continuously learn, of course. And obviously the folks on this listening to this are in that quest for learning, or they wouldn't have listened to me for this long. So thank you. You're probably in that fabric already. But the other part is venturing out. And this is something I don't see enough of, in my opinion, where Ho-Chunk families are not out hiking, camping, canoeing, kayaking, and praying, and normalizing that. I don't see enough of that. And I know I grew up that way. I mean, there were times when my mom would pack a tent and maybe a couple gallons of milk and a little bit of food, a box of cereal, and we'd go stay out on a lake lot for a week, and that was our vacation. And we would fish and eat all of our fish. We would go pick berries and things, and we would eat that. And I grew up knowing that, we can live off of our land, like right now, but do we do it? Do we know how to do it? Who's out there teaching? And I say, seek knowledge from those that are wiser than you, right? Seek knowledge from them. And they're out there. They often give it for free. And it's a good thing to venture out and teach your kids how to venture out and see how happy your kids are. I know my kids are always smiling ear to ear. We just did a hike on Saturday with the National South Central Autism Society. We went hiking all around this area where there's Ho-Chunk Mounds and the topping park here in Daejeop. And, our family was out on the ice for like an hour, just walking and hiking through the woods. And it was wonderful. And getting out there and praying, offering some tobacco and just reconnecting. That's reconnection right there. That's your first steps of reconnection is get familiar with your spaces and learn about them. And then not just your local spaces, but widely discover your homelands. I mean, I'm still in an era where I make my family go on these ridiculous trips to places like Dubuque or wherever. And we go into the local museums and we go to all of the parks and we hike and we read all of the little informational things about how did the local natives here lose their land and to what extent did it go off to, non-native ownership? What's the land tenure here and what's left here for us today and actually be in it? I find that incredibly empowering and enriching. So that's one of our family habits is we go venture out and learn about these spaces by just spending a night or two there. Also organize and participate civically in your local community. And, this is where I think we have a lot of opportunity. We have these area meetings every month and, tribal members can bring their experience of, either their staycation or vacation of learning about Ho-Chunk ancestral lands, or if you're going to these town board meetings and you're learning of opportunities that the community should jump on, bring those, change the vibe in that area meeting to some civic successes and civic strategies for you local Ho-Chunks in that area. We could move away from some of the other negativity there, which is why a lot of tribal members don't go to area meetings, and bring back this positivity and this future aspect of civic involvement and healing. And people can come because they want to be part of that, right? And they don't want to be part of something else that isn't as positive. So these are ideas that, things that you can do. And next slide. And I'm just going to wrap things up here and leave you with one of my favorite songs. I've thankfully been taught by the green deers and the black deers and learned all songs when I was very, very young and grown into them over the years. And this is probably one that I think hits home for our healing process. And down here in Daejeop, you're looking at, to your right, Hudson Park, which overlooks Lake Monona. And this is the park with the effigy mounds closest to my house. If you go left of the statue is where my house is, about 5 more minutes down the road. But I frequently drive through all of the state and local parks that have Indian mounds on them and check on them. And this is one that I frequent. Here, Harry Whitehorse, who has passed on, would make sculptures. And if you go to the Ho-Chunk Judiciary on Highway 54, you'll see a lot of his carvings there as well from all of the clans that are represented in the art in that building. But here are our Wažookį song. And Wažookį is a concept that is actually embedded in our written laws at the courts. And I know because I served one term as an elected associate justice where we incorporated Wažookį into our ways of thinking out disputes that were in front of us. So this is our strongest customary law captured, and the song is one of those old songs that talk about how we should love one another, and that when we do those things, we're doing them in the way that Mauna wanted to see us. That's the way he wanted the reflection of us. And that's the good people. And so I leave you with that thought and sentiment, and hope you are active in your ways, in your homelands, and that they bring you the healing that you're looking for. Thanks for listening. Happy to take any comments or questions, and I've left my email on the slide, so you can certainly reach out. Thank you.
Pinagi, Samantha, and thank you for sharing with us about Ho-Chunk land and its power to heal. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at our next session on Wednesday, February 5th. We'll be joined by Hinu Smith, the Director of Ho-Chunk Nation Department of Agriculture. We welcome all feedback related to this series. If you have a topic that you would like to learn more about, or if you would like to present